He walked through the city wearing a worn-out hat and boots still dirty with dust, just another country bumpkin in the eyes of those who didn't know how to look with their hearts. But the moment he stepped inside the coffee, everything changed. The most beautiful woman in town humiliated him in front of everyone, laughing at his old pickup truck, his simple clothes, and the quiet manner of that man. She had no idea, not even in her most ambitious dreams, that behind that calm gaze stood one of the richest, most discreet, and most powerful men in the entire region. And even less did she imagine that this encounter, which began with arrogance and disdain, would change her life forever. Because on that afternoon, she didn't meet a bumpkin. She met the millionaire rancher who would transform her heart and her history in a way she could never foresee. Before we continue, like this video, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. The sun hadn't even fully risen when Antonio Valenza crossed the courtyard of the Valley Gold Ranch, his leather hat snug on his head and his steps calm, the steps of a man who learned long ago to listen more than he speaks. The scent of damp earth, mixed with the gentle perfume of freshly cut grass, signaled that the morning would be cool, despite the heat forecasted for later. Antonio had always loved that hour of the day, when the ranch was silent and everything seemed perfectly balanced. That was the moment he reminded himself that no fortune had any value if he couldn't feel the living ground beneath his boots. Antonio walked to the fence, observing the cattle grazing in the distance, and took a deep breath. He was simple in manner, but his fortune easily surpassed anything anyone in the small town of Riverbend could imagine. He never cared about showing off, and precisely because of that, many believed he was just another countryman, an ordinary rural worker. Antonio found that amusing. It was almost like a natural disguise life had given him, one he wore effortlessly. He adjusted his hat and prepared to start the day. He had an important appointment in town. He needed to speak with the manager of the new coffee opening in the central square. The owner, a young and very ambitious woman, had invited him to review some details about supplying products from the ranch. Antonio didn't care much for small business partnerships, but he liked helping hard-working people. What he didn't know was that, in that same coffee, fate was about to cross his path with someone who would change the course of that day completely. Riverbend was busier than usual when Antonio parked his old pickup truck, a vintage Chevrolet he had restored himself, with worn paint and cracked leather seats. To anyone else, that vehicle looked like something a simple farmer would drive. To Antonio, it was just the truck he liked to use when he wanted to go unnoticed. He stepped out calmly, adjusted his hat, checked the watch on his wrist, and walked toward the coffee. On the way, he noticed several young women, all well-dressed, taking photos of themselves on the sidewalks. Some wore clothes far too elegant for such a small town. Expensive dresses, high heels, flawless makeup. There must have been some kind of event, maybe a fashion contest, maybe a convention. Antonio didn't think much of it. The crowd grew denser as he approached the square. The cafe was crowded, soft music playing inside, people coming and going non-stop. He opened the door slowly and went in. That's when he saw her. A woman so beautiful, she looked like she'd walked straight out of a magazine ad, was standing beside the counter, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. She had long, carefully styled blonde hair, piercing green eyes, and a red dress that probably cost as much as a month's salary for most of the locals. She held her phone with the perfect posture of a digital influencer, and her tone blended authority with disdain. "How am I supposed to take a decent photo with such simple decoration?" she complained to the coffee manager. "I came here because they told me it had rustic charm." "Rustic, yes. Poor, absolutely not." The manager looked visibly uncomfortable. Several people exchanged disapproving glances. Antonio watched too, but without judgment. He had seen a lot in life, and he knew arrogance often came from the fear of being perceived as small. The woman noticed him walking in, and for some reason her green eyes followed him as he approached the counter. Maybe she expected him to look away, like many men did when faced with such beauty. But Antonio was unshakable. He simply looked at her for a moment, nodded politely, and turned to speak with the manager. That was when the beautiful woman decided to humiliate him. "My God," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "As if this place couldn't get any worse. Now there's even a hillbilly walking in. Just look at the state of that hat, and that old pickup truck outside. It's his, isn't it?" A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. The manager tried to intervene. "Ma'am, please," but the woman didn't stop. "No, look at this," she went on, stepping closer to Antonio with a cynical smile. "I come here to take professional photos, and I find this. You could at least have taken a shower before coming to town, don't you think?" Her laughter echoed through the room. Antonio remained calm. His eyes, always serene, simply observed the woman for a moment, as if analyzing every word, every gesture, every trace of her expression. There was no anger, no irritation, only a strange compassion. "Good morning, ma'am," he said in a low, deep, polite voice. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "Disturb?" She laughed loudly. "You're ruining the aesthetics of the place, that's what you're doing." Some people began whispering. A man murmured, "Poor guy." A woman replied, "He seems so polite. What a shame for that girl." But the influencer didn't notice, or didn't care. "You know what it is?" she said, getting even closer to Antonio. "I'm here to sign partnerships with important businessmen in the region. Influential people. You probably don't even know what that means. You must be just a farmhand, right?" Antonio took a slow breath and gave a short, almost invisible smile. "Maybe," he answered calmly. The woman crossed her arms and turned to the manager. "I want to speak with the owner of this coffee, right now." The manager took a deep breath. "He's already here." The influencer looked around confused. "Where?" That was when the manager pointed directly at Antonio. Silence dropped over the cafe, as if someone had turned off every sound at once. The beautiful woman's eyes widened. No, she stammered. "This is a joke, right?" The manager shook her head. "This is Mr. Antonio Valenza, owner of the coffee, owner of the ranch that supplies our products, and owner of several properties in town." The woman lost every trace of arrogance. The color drained from her face for a few seconds. She looked at Antonio in pure shock, not knowing what to do. Antonio, however, remained perfectly calm. "You were looking for influential businessmen," he said. "I believe you found one." He turned to the manager. "Shall we go over what you wanted to show me, Anna?" The manager nodded, still surprised by how composed he was. The influencer took a step back, trembling. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Antonio looked at her with serene eyes. "It's all right," he said. "Life teaches us at the right time." He walked toward the back of the cafe, leaving behind the woman who had humiliated him minutes earlier. She stood there, shaking, completely ungrounded, realizing that the hillbilly she had mocked was exactly the millionaire she had always dreamed of meeting, and her story was only just beginning. The influencer remained frozen in the middle of the cafe for several seconds, trying to understand how the situation had turned against her so quickly. Shame burned her face like fire, and she couldn't stop her hands from trembling. Never in her entire life had someone left her so speechless. She was used to controlling rooms, people, conversations, but not that man, not that hillbilly who had suddenly revealed himself to be so much more than she imagined. She tried to regain her composure, even knowing that half the people in the room had heard everything. Some looked at her with hidden contempt, others with cruel amusement. Influencers live off image, and in that moment hers was shattered. She took a deep breath, swallowed her pride, and forced a discreet practice smile, one perfected after years of social media. I guess I'll wait a little, she muttered, speaking more to herself than to anyone else. Without the courage to leave, she moved to a table in the corner, sat down, and opened her laptop. She pretended to be busy, but the truth was that her eyes couldn't leave the door leading to the back of the coffee, where Antonio and the manager had disappeared. In the back room, Anna was showing Antonio some newly arrived boxes, samples of new product packaging, and documents for him to sign. She spoke with enthusiasm, but there was a certain brightness in her eyes, a mix of respect and relief. Antonio had always been fair, and having him there after such an embarrassing situation only reinforced how much she admired his character. "Sorry about what happened out front," Anna said, adjusting her glasses. "We tried to keep this place welcoming, but some people walk in with an arrogance that no one deserves." Antonio gave a small smile. "You don't need to apologize for something you didn't do. People show who they are when they think no one important is watching." Anna nodded. "You handled that incredibly well. If it were me, I would have lost my patience." "Anger weighs more on the heart of the one who feels it," Antonio replied. "I'd rather keep space only for what's worth it." Anna smiled. She had always admired the way he dealt with everything in life. They continued discussing numbers, deadlines, and products. Antonio signed a few papers, approved new ideas, corrected small details. It was clear he trusted that cafe greatly, and trusted Anna even more. She was competent, hard-working, and had honest plans for the place. But even while he stood there physically, Antonio felt a persistent presence outside. He knew the influencer hadn't left. He had seen, through the reflection in the glass, that she had sat at a table. She was probably trying to figure out how to redeem herself. Meanwhile, the pretty girl, whose name was Bianca, was drowning in fast, panicked thoughts. Bianca Torres wasn't just anyone. She had over 800,000 followers on Instagram, around 300,000 on TikTok, and lived on sponsorships, partnerships, and luxury events. She wasn't in Riverbend by accident. She had received a proposal for a campaign with local businessmen and wanted to impress them. Her plan was to take advantage of the town's rustic charm to shoot photos that looked authentic, something her followers adored, even if it was staged. But everything went wrong. She never imagined that the simple man who walked into the cafe would be exactly the kind of influential person she wanted to meet. And worse, the kind she tried to humiliate. Bianca tapped her fingers on the table, irritated with herself. She always had an unmatched talent for socializing, but also an involuntary gift for getting into trouble whenever she underestimated someone. "How could I be so stupid?" she whispered. The back door opened, and Bianca straightened her posture immediately. Antonio walked out, talking calmly with Anna. They exchanged a few words at the entrance, and then Anna returned to the back room, leaving the rancher standing there. Bianca didn't waste a second. She stood up, adjusted her dress, tossed her hair back, and walked toward him. Every step calculated, every movement smooth, every smile rehearsed. She knew how to use her beauty as a tool, not out of malice, but because she learned early on that the world paid more attention to people with a pretty face. "Mr. Antonio?" she called in a sweet voice. He turned slowly. "Yes." Bianca took a breath, trying to sound genuine. "I wanted to apologize for what happened. I was rude. I was impulsive. And honestly, I feel terrible about it." Antonio looked at her, serious but not hostile. He didn't seem impressed by her beauty. That for Bianca was rare and unsettling. "You don't need to feel that way," Antonio replied. "I wasn't offended." "Really?" she asked with a weak smile. "Really," he said, "but I hope you learned something." Bianca looked away for a moment. "I did, and if you'd allow me, I would really like to talk properly. I'd like to understand how I can make this right." Antonio raised an eyebrow. "Make it right?" "Yes," she said, taking a small step forward. "I honestly didn't know who you were." "And if you did?" Antonio asked straightforward. The question struck Bianca off guard. "What do you mean?" "If you knew I had money, influence, would you have treated me differently?" Bianca blinked. She felt the weight of the question, and for the first time that day, she realized she wasn't speaking to someone naive or easy to manipulate. Antonio saw right through people. It was as if he looked straight into their souls. She tried to speak the truth without sounding foolish. "I think, yes, I would have." Antonio nodded, as if he had already expected that answer. "Then there's nothing you can fix with me," he said calmly. "Only with yourself." Bianca felt her heart freeze. "But I wanted a chance to talk, to show you I'm not like that." "Everyone shows who they are when they think no one is watching," Antonio repeated. "And you showed it. I just hope you get the chance to become someone better than you were today." Bianca couldn't speak. Antonio placed his hat on his head, adjusted the brim, and signaled to Anna. "I'm going," he said. "Thanks for the coffee." He turned to leave. Bianca stepped forward, almost touching him. "Please, at least let me apologize properly. I really want to talk to you without all this tension." Antonio turned again. His calm, steady eyes made it clear he had already decided that this wasn't worth his time. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, "but I have an entire ranch to take care of, and real people to talk to." And he walked out through the main door, leaving Bianca alone, defeated, and for the first time in a very long while, not knowing what to do next. One thing was certain. She wasn't leaving without trying again. And unlike she expected, a new encounter was about to happen, one that would change her perception of that country boy even more. Bianca stood at the cafe doorway for a few seconds, watching Antonio walk down the sidewalk toward his worn-out pickup truck. Every step he took seemed steady, calm, indifferent to the fact that he had been despised and then flattered right after. There was no arrogance in the way he moved, just a quiet certainty from someone who knows exactly who he is and doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Bianca felt a strange sting in her chest. It wasn't exactly guilt nor shame. It was interest. An interest that went beyond his wealth, although she couldn't deny that the revelation about his fortune had shaken her. But there was something else. Something in the way he carried himself, in his calmness, his posture, his firmness, without aggression. Something that left her unsettled. She, who was used to men desperate for her attention, found herself intrigued by someone who seemed to want nothing from her. That didn't happen often. A woman like Bianca didn't tolerate being ignored. Something inside her refused to accept that cold, definitive goodbye. Without thinking twice, she rushed to the cafe door and stepped outside, calling after him. "Antonio, wait, please." He was already opening the truck door when he heard her voice. But he didn't turn right away. He took a slow breath, sensing this conversation wouldn't be simple. Only then did he look back. Bianca approached, walking quickly in her high heels, almost tripping on the uneven sidewalk. She tried to catch her breath. "Please don't leave like this." Antonio said nothing, simply waiting. And she would discover that Antonio was far more than just a millionaire in disguise. I know I messed up," she said, her voice weaker than she wanted, "and I know I have no excuse. But can I ask you honestly, for just a few minutes? I want to understand. I want to explain." Antonio tilted his head slightly, analyzing her expression. He saw no falseness. He saw desperation. And maybe a bruised pride. "Why is this so important to you?" he asked. The simple question hit Bianca deeply. She looked around, as if hoping to find an answer floating in the air. "Because I don't like leaving things like this," she said. "And because you're not like the others." Antonio kept his face steady. "How so?" Bianca bit her lip, trying to organize her thoughts. "Most men treat me like I'm too special, you know. They do anything to please me. But you just turned your back." "Does that bother you?" Antonio asked. "It does," she admitted, painfully honest. "It bothers me because it makes me feel like I don't have control over the situation. And I've always had control." Antonio studied her green eyes, intense and confused. He saw that she wasn't just arrogant. She was also someone who lived off appearances, someone who had probably built a mask too heavy to carry. "Bianca," he said with a calmness that unraveled her, "control is an illusion. You only thought you had it." She swallowed hard. Can I at least buy you a coffee?" she tried. "Bianca," he responded, "I don't need coffee, or apologies, and much less explanations." She took another step toward him. "But I need it," she insisted, almost pleading. "Please give me that chance." Antonio fell silent again, observing the woman in front of him. The unexpected fragility, the mix of pride and regret, the sincere, though clumsy, attempt to make things right. She wasn't just a pretty woman. She was someone lost inside her own image. Antonio took a deep breath and opened the truck door. Bianca felt her heart drop. "So, it's a no?" she asked, her voice cracking. Antonio paused. "I'm going back to the ranch," he said. "If you want to talk, you can go there. The road is simple. Drive 2 kilometers south down the highway, turn into the large wooden gate and keep going until you reach the house." Bianca widened her eyes. You're inviting me." "No," Antonio replied. "I'm telling you where I'll be. The rest is up to you." He got into the truck, started the engine, and drove off slowly, leaving Bianca standing on the sidewalk, hugging her own arms as if protecting herself from a breeze that wasn't even that strong. She remained there until the truck disappeared down the road, and in that moment she made a decision. 3 hours later, Bianca was driving her car, a rented luxury sedan, along the rural highway. Her heart racing, her mind full of doubts and conflicting emotions. She wondered why she was doing this. Was it pride, curiosity, interest, emotional need, or the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand? The entrance to Valley Gold Ranch appeared before her, huge, imposing, made of flawless old wood, marked by decades of stories. The gate opened automatically when the sensor detected her car approaching. Bianca was stunned. She never would have imagined such a large and elegant structure. It was rustic, but rich in a discreet, powerful way. She drove along an internal road lined with trees and endless pastures, the sound of horses' hooves in the distance, the smell of fresh grass, the wind touching her face through the open window. Everything felt new, different, almost liberating. When she parked near the main house, Bianca felt her hands grow sweaty. The house was big, but not extravagant. Dark wood, wide windows, a huge porch. A house built to be lived in, not to impress. She stepped out of the car. Antonio was on the porch, sitting in a wooden chair, watching the horizon. A cup of coffee sat beside him, and his eyes were half closed from the afternoon sun. When Bianca approached, he didn't seem surprised. "You came," he said. She took a deep breath. "I did." "Why?" Antonio asked without hesitation. Bianca hesitated. She looked at her hands, then at the sky, then at him. "Because I don't know," she said honestly. "But something in here," she pointed to her chest, "brought me to you." Antonio tilted his head slightly, as if finally seeing something beneath the surface. "Come in," he said. "Let's talk." Bianca followed him to the porch, sat across from him, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something she rarely experienced: vulnerability. The conversation that was about to unfold would change the course of their relationship, and the way Bianca saw not only Antonio, but herself. Because there, on that silent farm, cared for with love and simplicity, she would finally meet the kind of man she never knew she needed. He was someone who saw beyond. The gentle breeze crossing the porch brought an unexpected calm to Bianca's heart. Despite her anxiety, something about that place, maybe the silence, maybe the smell of wood, maybe Antonio himself, made her breathe deeply and feel that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Antonio served them both coffee without ceremony. The cup he handed her was simple handmade clay, nothing like the lifestyle she displayed on social media, but surprisingly, that made her feel even more at ease. It was as if he wanted to show, without saying a word, that here no one needed to pretend. She held the cup carefully, as if afraid to break it. He noticed and gave a slight smile. "You don't have to be so scared," he said. "It's just coffee." Bianca laughed nervously. "I've never had coffee like this. It seems stronger." "It's pure," Antonio explained. "No sugar, no fancy stuff." Bianca brought the cup to her lips, hesitated for a moment, then drank. The intense flavor surprised her. It was strong, but real. No filters, just like everything on that ranch. "I like it," she said honestly. "Good," Antonio replied, resting his hands on his knees. "Now tell me, what did you really come here for?" Bianca took a deep breath, staring at the horizon for a few seconds before looking back at him. "I came because I feel there's something I need to understand here, and I think you can help me see it." "See what?" "The things I don't see," she said, her voice almost breaking. Antonio watched her carefully. She no longer resembled the arrogant woman from the coffee. Now there was a vulnerability in her he never expected from someone used to controlling every room she entered. "Bianca," he began, "you've spent your whole life believing the world has to revolve around you. That beauty gives you power. And it did, for a while, but that didn't bring anyone closer to you, and it didn't bring you peace." She blinked, swallowing his words. "You don't know me," she whispered. "No," he agreed, "but I know that kind of loneliness very well." Bianca looked at him with genuine surprise. It was hard to imagine a man like him, so calm, so steady, feeling lonely. He always seemed in control, always centered. "Lonely? You?" she asked. "Money doesn't just push away the fake ones," he said. "Sometimes it pushes away the good ones too. You never know who approaches you for who you are, or for what you have." The sentence struck Bianca like lightning. She knew exactly what he meant, better than she wished, but in that instant she realized he understood too. "So you think I came here for your money?" she asked, afraid of the answer. Antonio looked at her with a serenity that was almost unsettling. "I think you came here because, for the first time in a long time, someone saw you beyond the image, beyond the pretty pictures, beyond the influence, and that scared you." Bianca fell silent, a heavy, necessary silence. Antonio continued, "You didn't come for my money. You came for the one thing I didn't bother giving you, my attention." Bianca felt those words hit her like a punch to the chest, because they were true. She would never admit it out loud, but she couldn't stand being ignored. She couldn't stand losing control. She couldn't stand feeling like she wasn't enough. She began, but her voice failed. Antonio gently encouraged her. "Go on." Bianca took a deep breath. She removed the sunglasses resting on top of her head and placed them beside her on the table. Her green eyes, now completely exposed, looked more fragile than he ever imagined. "I just wanted, for the first time, for someone to look at me without expecting something in return. without wanting to use me, without pretending. I wanted someone to actually see me. Antonio remained silent for a few seconds, not out of harshness, but out of respect. "Bianca," he said in a deep voice, "no one can see you if you're hiding behind an edited version of yourself." She looked away, feeling the sting of a truth that hurt. "I don't know how to be different," she confessed. "You learn," he said. "Life teaches, and sometimes it hurts until we figure out how to live for real." Bianca breathed deeply, trying to steady her emotions. "And you, do you think I can learn?" Antonio gave a slight smile. "Everyone can, as long as they want to." They stayed silent for a few seconds. The wind blew a bit stronger, lifting a loose lock of Bianca's hair. Without realizing it, Antonio reached out to fix the strand, but stopped halfway and pulled his hand back discreetly. Bianca noticed and smiled. "Are you afraid of me?" she teased. "I'm not afraid of anything," Antonio replied, resting his hat on his leg. "But I have respect, and I know when someone is trying to confuse me." Bianca let out a soft laugh. "Confuse? Me?" She raised her eyebrows. "Maybe a little." "I know," he said, "but that doesn't work on me." Bianca leaned back, crossed her legs, and stared at Antonio with an almost studied curiosity. "You know, you're different from every man I've ever met," she said. "Is that good or bad?" "It's intriguing." Antonio took a deep breath and stood up slowly. "Bianca, I'm not someone to play games with. I'm not a trophy to be displayed. If you want something with me, you'll have to be honest, with yourself and with me." Bianca stood as well, stepping closer to him. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I just know that I didn't want you to leave without giving me a second chance." "The second chance has already begun," he said. "You're here." She looked at him, deeper this time. "So, what do I do now?" Bianca asked. Antonio adjusted his hat and looked toward the road, where a few horses ran freely across the open field. "Now," he said, "you get to know the ranch." "What do you mean?" "Come with me," he replied, stepping down the 3 porch stairs. Bianca, confused but curious, followed him. They walked to the stables where several horses grazed peacefully. The afternoon sun illuminated each strand of their manes, creating golden reflections that made the place feel almost magical. Bianca had never been so close to a horse. She reached out timidly, but stepped back when the animal approached her too fast. Antonio held her hand with firm, calm steadiness. "No need to be afraid," he said. "They can sense when you're nervous." Bianca felt his touch and held her breath. It wasn't romantic or suggestive. It was steady, stable, protective. She relaxed. The horse pressed its nose into her palm. Bianca smiled. "He's beautiful." "His name is Star," Antonio said. "He's gentle. You can ride him if you want." "Ride?" Bianca's eyes widened. "Of course. You said you wanted to understand. And understanding means living it, not just hearing about it." Bianca hesitated. Antonio looked at her seriously. "Do you trust me?" She took a breath. "I do." "Then get on." Bianca bit her lip, looked at the horse, and with some hesitation placed her foot in the stirrup. Antonio helped her mount, holding her firmly by the waist to keep her from slipping. She walked to him and sat too, though keeping a bit of distance. Birds sang in the background, the wind blew softly, and the silence that formed between them wasn't uncomfortable, almost intimate. Bianca took a deep breath. Her heart pounded faster when he touched her. Antonio noticed, but said nothing. "Hold tight," he said, mounting the horse beside her, "and don't look down." Bianca took a deep breath, adjusted herself in the saddle, and as the horses began to move, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. It was as if everything she knew, the parties, the flashes, the contracts, the followers, had become distant, small, almost irrelevant. Here, riding beside that mysterious rancher, everything felt more real. And she was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, the interest she felt for him had nothing to do with money, but with everything money could never buy. And this would be the beginning of a change she never saw coming. The horses moved slowly along the dirt trail, kicking up small clouds of soft dust that dissolved in the warm afternoon air. Bianca held the reins with both hands, stiff as a board, trying to keep her balance while Star walked with steady steps. Antonio, riding the horse beside her, watched her every movement, making sure she wouldn't fall, without showing excessive concern. He knew that if he showed doubt, she would only get more nervous. "Relax your shoulders," he said calmly. "You're holding too much tension." Bianca tried to follow the instruction, loosening her body slightly, but her jaw was still clenched tight. "I'm afraid of falling," she confessed through her teeth. "Falling is part of it," Antonio replied. "But you're not going to fall, not with me here." That sentence, said with such certainty, calmed something inside her. She took a deep breath, opened her legs a bit more to settle into the saddle, and loosened the reins more naturally. Star moved, as if he felt the change, more at ease, more in sync with her body. "Better," Antonio said, "much better." The trail led to a part of the ranch where there was a lake. The surface of the water reflected the orange sky forming above them. Bianca had never seen a sunset like that, not in real life. It felt straight out of a movie. The golden light illuminated the horses, the green fields around them, the distant trees, and even the strands of her blonde hair that swayed gently in the breeze. "This is beautiful," she murmured, barely realizing she spoke out loud. Antonio smiled, looking toward the horizon. "Nature doesn't need filters, Bianca." She looked at him. "I think I forgot what it feels like to see something like this, without thinking about photos or videos. Whoever lives for the image," Antonio said, "loses real life." The phrase hit her hard. Bianca looked away, thoughtful. She didn't know if she was irritated by his honesty or grateful that someone had finally said a truth she never admitted. After a few minutes, they reached the lake. The horses stopped naturally, sensing the peace of the place. Bianca dismounted with Antonio's help, his hand on her waist and her hand in his, steady and firm. Her heart sped up again. Every touch from him felt different. There was no hidden intention, no showy desire. It was simply care, real care. Once they were both on the ground, Bianca walked to the water's edge. Her reflection on the lake looked softer, more human, less produced than the reflection she was used to seeing in glamorous mirrors. "I feel strange," she said, looking at her distorted image on the water. "Strange how?" Antonio asked, approaching but keeping a respectful distance. "I feel light," she confessed, "and it doesn't make sense. I should be worried about my content, about tomorrow's event, about the contract I need to close. But I'm here, and it's like none of that matters." Antonio looked at the lake. "Things only matter when they make sense to the heart," he said. "Everything else is noise." Bianca turned to him, surprised. "You talk like you studied philosophy." "I studied life," he replied simply. "And it teaches more than any book." Bianca smiled. Not a seductive smile, not a calculated one. It was real, almost childlike, as if she had forgotten for a moment the weight of expectations she always carried. "I feel like," she hesitated, "like I can breathe better here. Maybe because, for the first time, you're not trying to impress anyone." Bianca felt her breath catch for a moment. Tears threatened to come, but she didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't know if it was pride or fear of being truly seen. Antonio noticed the shine in her eyes, but didn't say anything. Instead, he walked to a fallen tree trunk near the lake and sat down. "Come," he said, inviting her with a gesture. Antonio, can I ask you something? You can. Why? Why do you live like this, so simply? With so much money you could have mansions, luxury cars, international trips. Yet, she looked around, you live as if none of that matters. Antonio took a few seconds before answering. Because it doesn't matter. Bianca's eyes widened. It doesn't? Money only serves two things, he said, looking at the sky, helping those who need it and guaranteeing freedom. The rest is an invention of people who don't know what living really is. A shiver ran down Bianca's back. And are you free? She asked. Antonio gave a small half-smile. I have enough. Bianca looked at him in silence. His serene face, steady hands, calm gaze. He was a man who seemed to have found balance, something she didn't even know she was searching for. Antonio, she began, do you think there's anything in me that's worth it? Antonio slowly turned his face toward her. Why are you asking that? Because, she swallowed hard, I feel like, when I'm near you, I don't have to pretend. And that scares me. Because maybe, she hesitated, maybe I don't know who I really am. The wind blew stronger. Antonio looked at the water. You know who you are, he said. You just don't know if you have the courage to show it. Bianca felt the tears finally slip out, silent. She tried to wipe her face discreetly, turning a little to the side, but Antonio noticed. He extended a pocket handkerchief, simple, embroidered with old initials. Thank you, she whispered, drying her face. Crying isn't weakness, he said. It's just too much sincerity to fit inside us. Bianca looked at him, and in that instant she understood something new. Antonio wasn't just a simple millionaire. He was a man who saw the world and people with a disarming clarity. He had no filters, no masks. He was whole, and that attracted her more than any luxury car, any designer dress, any spotlight. Antonio, she said softly, I didn't come here out of interest. I came because something about you pulled me. I know, he replied calmly. You do? How? He looked into her eyes. Because I've seen too much interest in my life not to recognize when it's something else. Bianca smiled, and this time the smile carried a shine that didn't come from beauty or makeup. It came from sincerity. Antonio rose slowly. Let's head back, he said. It's getting dark. Bianca stood as well, but when she took the first step, she tripped over a root and nearly fell. Antonio caught her by the waist before she hit the ground. She was so close to him, she could almost feel the firm rhythm of his heartbeat. For a moment, neither of them moved. Bianca blinked slowly. Thank you, she murmured. You're welcome, Antonio replied, his voice low and deeper in the moment. They stepped apart gently, as if the moment needed to be broken with care. They mounted the horses again. The trail back felt different. It wasn't just a path. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. When they reached the house, Bianca dismounted first, taking a deep breath as if waking from a dream. Antonio, she said, turning to him, do you think I could come back tomorrow? He thought for a few seconds. If you come as yourself, you can. Bianca smiled, a genuine, soft, almost shy smile. Then I'll come. And for the first time since arriving in town, she left a place without feeling superior to anyone. She left feeling human. Antonio watched as she got into her car and drove away, kicking up dust along the road. When she disappeared from sight, he removed his hat and took a deep breath. He knew that woman would bring storms, but he also knew that sometimes storms clear the sky. Night fell over Riverbend with a tranquility Bianca hadn't felt in years. She drove back to the boutique hotel downtown, but the road seemed different. The streetlights, the distant chirping of crickets, the starry sky, they all had a new glow, almost as if she was seeing the world for the first time without a blue or orange artificial filter. When she entered the room, she dropped her purse on the armchair, removed her heels, and stood barefoot, feeling the soft carpet under her feet. She walked to the large mirror framed with golden lights. Her reflection, usually so calculated and polished, looked strange. It didn't match the Bianca who had climbed down from a saddle a few hours earlier. The perfect makeup, the styled hair, the expensive clothes, looked like they belonged to someone else. She approached the mirror and sighed, removing her sparkling earrings, then her necklace, her bracelets, and finally she pulled down the zipper of her red dress, letting it slide off her body until it pooled at her feet. She remained in a simple nightgown she had bought in a hurry at a local store. For the first time in a long time, Bianca didn't feel powerful in front of the mirror. She didn't feel empty either. She felt real. "Who are you?" she whispered to her own reflection. The question echoed in her mind, bringing back memories of past conversations, moments where she had needed to fake strength, fake happiness, fake security. But on that ranch, at that lake, with that man, she didn't need to fake anything. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was so deep it almost bothered her. Bianca wasn't used to being so alone with her thoughts. There had always been noise, messages, notifications, videos, comments, constant work. But now she didn't want to pick up her phone. She didn't want to hide. Antonio had shaken her in a way no one ever had. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Antonio sat on the porch again, now alone. The night sky was clear, dotted with stars. He had always loved this hour, when the day ended and everything finally went quiet. But that night his mind wasn't as peaceful as usual. He was thinking about Bianca, not out of desire nor vanity. He thought of her because he had seen something in her eyes that he rarely found in someone with so much attitude. Fear. Not the superficial fear most people carried, but the deep fear of not knowing who they really are. He picked up his mug of coffee, now cold, and took a sip. He heard the horses shifting in the stables, the wind rustling the leaves of the trees, the distant bang of some loose door. The ranch was a quiet song, and Antonio was its silent conductor. But there was something new that night, a feeling he couldn't fully explain, not discomfort but caution, not worry but curiosity. Bianca wasn't like the others who had tried to approach him out of interest. She had made a mistake, yes, but she had shown remorse. She had shown truth, and that touched a part of his heart he had kept closed for many years. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what might happen if she actually returned the next day. Maybe he could show her more of the ranch, teach her more about horses, talk about life. There was no commitment, no obligation, just possibilities. But Antonio was an experienced man. He knew beauty and impulse often mixed. He knew Bianca came from a world completely different from his own. And he knew that even with good intentions, someone so used to flashing cameras might not adapt to the deep simplicity of Uro de Vale Ranch. He sighed and got up, going inside the house. He picked an old book from the shelf, a gift from his father, and tried to read. But the words seemed scrambled. The image of Bianca, with her hair blowing in the wind, her shy smile, and her honest eyes by the lake, kept returning to his mind over and over. It was a sign, one he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Bianca woke up before her alarm went off. She opened her eyes as if she had slept only a few hours, and she had. She had dreamed all night of horses, the ranch, the lake, and of Antonio. Not romanticized, not idealized, but as a real man, with a strong and calming presence. She showered quickly, pulled her hair into a loose bun, and opened the wardrobe. The designer clothes looked exaggerated. They didn't fit the place she was about to return to. She chose light jeans, a simple white cotton shirt, and comfortable sneakers. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. But for the first time, she liked what she saw. She grabbed only the essentials: the car key, her phone, and sunscreen. No makeup, no accessories, no production. On the way to the ranch, her heart raced. Part of her feared that Antonio had regretted inviting her. Maybe he thought she would be a problem, an unnecessary headache. Maybe he had only been polite. When the big gate opened, Bianca took a deep breath. She drove in. The ranch was alive. Workers moved back and forth, guiding cattle, fixing fences, cleaning areas. Some looked at her with curiosity. Others waved, friendly. Bianca waved back, timid. She parked near the house and stepped out of the car. Antonio was on the porch again, a warm cup in his hand. He watched her arrival with a neutral expression, not cold, not distant, just neutral. She walked toward him slowly. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound steady. "Good morning," he replied, stepping down from the porch. "You got here early." "I didn't sleep much," she admitted. "I had a lot on my mind." He nodded. "Want some coffee?" "I do," she said, surprised at how natural it sounded. They entered the kitchen. It was simple, but welcoming. Bianca brushed her hand along the solid wooden table worn by time. She felt the rough, story-filled texture beneath her fingertips. "This house," she commented, "it's beautiful." "It's old," he said, pouring coffee for them both, "but strong." Bianca knew he was talking about the house, but she also knew he wasn't talking only about the house. When they sat at the table, silence settled between them. Not tense, comfortable. Antonio waited for her to speak. Bianca waited for him to begin. It was a quiet pause, as if they were both getting to know each other without words. Finally, Bianca drew a long breath. "Antonio, I didn't come here to impress you, or to convince you of anything. I came because, for the first time in my life, I felt like continuing a conversation, continuing a story that started in a horrible way, but that touched me." He watched her, analyzing every word. "Bianca, the problem isn't what you want right now. The problem is whether you know what you truly want." She leaned forward a little, resting her elbows on the table. "I want to find out. And I think I might be able to find out here." Antonio held the cup with both hands and looked at her with a depth that made her shiver. "You know this place can change people," he said, "but it can also break anyone who tries to force what isn't real." "I'm not going to force anything," she replied. "I want to learn." He was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing the value of her words. Finally, Antonio stood up. "Then we're going to work." Bianca's eyes widened. "Work?" "Here, everybody works," he said, opening the kitchen door. "If you want to understand ranch life, you're going to have to get your hands in the dirt." Bianca looked down at her carefully kept nails, still without polish but perfectly clean. She looked at the dirt floor of the porch, then back at Antonio. I can try." "You don't need to try," he corrected. "You need to do." And then Bianca understood that this day would be much more than a reunion. It would be a test of her heart, and maybe of his as well. Bianca took a deep breath and followed Antonio out of the house. The sun was still low in the sky, but already warming the dry soil around the ranch. The scent of grass and damp earth rose softly, bringing an almost healing sensation to her, as if each step brought her closer to a truer version of herself. Antonio walked ahead, confident steps, hat adjusted, sleeves rolled up. She, a few meters behind, tried to keep up, and it wasn't easy. The ground was uneven. The boots she'd bought at the last minute rubbed painfully against her heel, and the growing heat loosened a strand of hair from her improvised bun. "Are you keeping up?" he asked without turning. "I am," she answered, even though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. If you get tired, tell me. I won't get tired. He finally glanced over his shoulder, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a discreet smile, as if he knew she was fighting herself more than the terrain. You don't have to prove anything to me, Bianca. She swallowed hard. That disarmed her more than any physical effort could. They walked to the area where a few workers were organizing hay and checking on the cattle. A light brown horse neighed at the sight of Antonio, who stroked its neck with firm, almost fatherly affection. Today you're going to help feed the calves, he said, handing her a bucket of warm milk. Bianca stared at the bucket as if it were a ticking time bomb. Just hold it tight, he explained. They'll push a little, but nothing you can't handle. She took a deep breath, pressed the bucket against her chest, and walked toward the first pen. A small bull calf, brown and white spotted, trotted toward her immediately, eager. Bianca stepped back, scared, but held the bucket firm. The calf pushed its nose into the bucket, splashing milk onto her shirt. She gasped, "Oh my God, he splashed me!" Antonio laughed as he walked closer. "Welcome to the ranch." Bianca couldn't help it. She laughed too. A soft, genuine laugh, nothing like the one she used on social media to look happy. This laugh came from inside, born from surprise, discomfort, and something new, something like freedom. "He's stronger than he looks," she said, trying to steady the bucket while the calf drank voraciously. "So are all of us," Antonio replied, looking at her in a way that made her heart speed up. Bianca looked away, blushing. After feeding the calves, Antonio took her to other parts of the ranch. He showed her the plantation area, the shed where they stored equipment, the workshop where he restored old vehicles, including the truck she had mocked at the coffee. "You restored it yourself?" she asked, running her hand over the worn paint, now seeing it differently. "Every screw," he replied. "I learned from my father. When he died, I kept doing it on my own." Bianca swallowed. He would be proud. Antonio looked toward the horizon. "Maybe. I like to think so." There was sadness there, a quiet longing. Bianca felt her heart tighten. It was the first time she had seen Antonio vulnerable, even if only slightly. And it was in that moment she realized his strength didn't come from wealth. It came from this quietness, this simplicity, this past full of scars he carried like medals. She stepped closer. "Antonio, you deserve someone who sees the world the way you do." He looked at her, serious. "And do you?" Bianca hesitated. For a moment, the silence between them seemed to swallow the rest of the ranch. "I'm learning," she answered, honest. Antonio took a deep breath, breaking the intensity of the moment. "Come on," he said, walking again. "The day's not over." Bianca followed him, feeling that with each step she wasn't just walking through the ranch, but toward herself. Hours later, close to the end of the afternoon, they returned to the lake where they had talked the day before. Bianca sat on the same fallen tree trunk, but now she seemed like a different person. Antonio noticed. "You're quiet," he commented. "I'm thinking," she said. "About what?" "About who I was before coming here, and who I'm becoming now." Antonio stepped closer, standing beside her. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Bianca." "But something happened," she said, looking at him. "I feel it inside me. Like this place, and you showed me things I never wanted to see." "Like what?" She took a deep breath. "Like the fact that I was never truly happy." Antonio didn't say anything. He simply watched her expression, letting her words settle. "I thought having followers, contracts, money, trips would be enough," Bianca continued. "But it wasn't. I got used to being admired, but not to being seen." "I saw you," Antonio said simply. She smiled, eyes glistening. "I know." A stronger breeze blew, lifting the strands of her hair. Bianca tucked one behind her ear, trying to hide the tremble in her hands. Antonio, I've never met anyone like you. And is that good? It's transformative. He observed her for long seconds, as if studying her soul. There was no lust in his gaze, no rush. There was something deeper, something that didn't need words. Antonio stepped a little closer. Bianca. She felt her heart stop for a moment. Yes? What are you looking for here? The question dropped like a stone into the water, creating invisible ripples between them. Bianca took a breath, feeling her eyes sting. I don't know what the future holds, she said, but I know that I want to keep getting to know you. I want to keep getting to know this place. I want to keep getting to know myself. She paused. Here. I feel alive. Antonio removed his hat, holding it against his chest. For him, that was an intimate gesture, a sign of deep respect. You're welcome here, he said, as long as you come with truth. I will, she replied. I promise. The sun began to set behind the fields, coloring the sky in gold and orange. Bianca rose to her feet, walked to the edge of the water, and let her feet touch the cool ground. She felt the breeze against her face. She closed her eyes. Antonio approached slowly, stopping just a few inches from her. Bianca. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Yes, the world you've lived in so far is very different from mine, and I don't know if you're going to want to stay in this one, but if you decide you want to try, there's no need to rush. She smiled. Who said I want to rush? Antonio took one step forward, closing the space between them. Her heart sped up. So did his, though he didn't show it. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Bianca lifted her hand slowly and placed it on his chest, right where his heart beat. Thank you, she whispered. For what? He asked. For showing me that there's life beyond the screens. Antonio didn't answer with words. He simply held her hand gently, grounding the touch. It was a simple gesture, yet powerful, as intimate as a kiss, as deep as a promise. There was no rush, no pressure, no masks, just two worlds, completely different, touching each other in the right way for the first time. Bianca breathed deeply, feeling something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. I'm coming back tomorrow, she said. I know, Antonio replied. She smiled. And will you be here? Always. Bianca let out a small, emotional laugh, and the two stood there side by side, watching the sun disappear behind the ranch. No rushed kisses, no forced declarations, no empty promises, just a beginning. An unexpected, deep beginning, full of possibilities. And that sunset, golden, silent, endless, would be remembered by both as the moment their paths began to intertwine. Because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones that end with a clear ending, but the ones that begin with truth. And on that day, at that lake, on that ranch, Bianca and Antonio finally found theirs.